The cowboy is one of the most iconic figures of the American West. If somebody's going to think about the American West, they're going to think about a cowboy. And based on depictions from popular culture, what a lot of people might not realize is that cowboys who lived and worked in the West during the open range era, so from the 1860s to the 1880s, were actually a really, really diverse group. So in addition to white cowboys, there were Mexican cowboys, Native American cowboys, and black cowboys. And historians actually estimate that about 25% of the cowboys who were living and working in the West from about the 1860s to the 1880s were black. And so they came from a lot of varied backgrounds. Some had been enslaved on the cattle ranches in Texas before the Civil War and the Emancipation Proclamation freed them and allowed them to be hired on as actual paid cowhands. Some were freedmen and women, because women also worked as cowboys in the West. Some were freedmen and women who moved out to the West from the East in search of better opportunities. Historians estimate that number anywhere from at least 5,000 black cowboys up to 9, or some historians even say 12,000 black cowboys and cowgirls were living and working in the West. And so their contributions to the development of the West as we know it today are so important, and you can't tell the full history of the American West without those voices and those stories. The West provided opportunities that they maybe didn't get to have in the East. There was still racism and discrimination in the West, but amongst the cowhands, there was a lot more equality. So among the actual groups that worked on the trails, there was much more equality. They lived and worked together, they ate side by side, and wages were generally fairly equal for white cowboys and black cowboys and the other groups who also worked as cowboys in the West. They were really important to the establishment of the West and important to the history of the West. One of the most well-known cowboys from this era who moved from the East to the West is Nat Love, who we see pictured here in a 1969 painting by the American artist James Bama. And this painting actually served as the cover illustration for a 1969 book called The Adventures of Negro Cowboys. And it was one of the first nonfiction books that actually focused on the stories and histories of black cowboys in the West. So Nat Love is one of the black cowboys whose names we know and whose stories we know. He was born to enslaved parents in 1854 in Tennessee, and at the age of 16, after the end of the Civil War, he decided to move out west to try and make his fortune. He ended up in Dodge City, Kansas, and ended up being hired on as a cowhand for the Duval Ranch. And so he took part in cattle drives all across the West for about 20 years, working in Texas, Arizona, all the way up to what is now Wyoming and Montana. And during this time, he became an expert marksman and roper, and reportedly earned the nickname Deadwood Dick, a reference to the dime novel hero, during a rodeo competition in Deadwood, South Dakota. One of the reasons we know so much about him and his life is in 1907, after he had left the cowboy, life behind. He got married in 1889 and decided to settle down in Denver. But in 1907, he self-published an autobiography called The Life and Adventures of Nat Love. And so it was his life story from the time he was, a child, an enslaved child growing up in Tennessee, all the way through to his life at that time. And he talks about being a cowboy in the West at that time and what his experiences were. Historians think he may have embellished or sensationalized some of his stories, as one may do. But it still is a really important novel and autobiography because it gives us a glimpse into the life of an actual 19th century black cowboy. And it just helps to serve as a reminder of how important black peoples have been to the history of the American West, and the fact that they still are. Black cowboy culture is still thriving in the West, and people are still following in the footsteps of cowboys like Nat Love. The West is a diverse place with a lot of people living here, and all of those people's stories are important.